Hi, I'm Mary Kopczynski, the CEO of RegAlytics. Welcome to this week's Regulatory Roundup. This week there were 1,312 alerts from 282 unique U.S. regulators, and 380 had to do with coronavirus. The regulator of the week is the CFTC, which busted two Canadian-based entities. The Bank of Nova Scotia was ordered to pay over $127 million in two enforcement actions for spoofing, false statements, compliance, and swap dealer supervision violations. The CFTC also ordered a Toronto-based firm to pay $500,000 for violating capital reporting and supervision rules. Finally, the CFTC released the agenda for Lab CFTC's upcoming virtual discussions with different industry participants to focus on cutting-edge fintech innovation. The topic of the week is tribal regulation. Some of you know there's an entire separate regime for tribal-based rules, and others of you are focused on esports and gaming, and you're aware that that is also an upcoming area of investment and consumer interests. Well, this week, the Federal Department of the Interior approved gaming compacts for tribes in both South Dakota and Oklahoma. The Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board proposed new rules this week to better manage regulatory oversight for interactive gaming. And the Washington Department of Financial Institutions is investigating a complaint by a Washington resident against a loan originator that is controlled by a federally recognized Indian tribe located in California. None of these entities are licensed to operate in Washington state. For those of you following AML KYC rules, there was a big joint issuance by the Fed, the FDIC, FinCEN, the NCUA, and the OCC about the Bank Secrecy Act and what the due diligence requirements are for customers who may be considered politically exposed persons or PEPs. Sounds like this is another rollback. The statement clarifies while banks must adopt appropriate risk-based procedures for conducting customer due diligence, known as CDD, the CDD rule does not create a regulatory requirement, and there's no supervisory expectation for banks to have unique additional due diligence steps for customers who are considered PEPs. FinCEN then issued a statement as the primary regulator and administrator of the Bank Secrecy Act about how it would go about enforcing these rules. For those of you following cannabis, vaping, and whatnot, be sure to check out Oregon, which just got the results of a vaping public health work group that recommends the ban of flavored products and harmful additives, increased prices, tobacco retail licensure, and banning online sales. For those of you following climate rules, Louisiana's governor signed two executive orders to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and enhance coastal resilience. Virginia signed legislation that accelerates its transition to a carbon-free future. The Virginia Clean Economy Act establishes energy efficiency standards and provides a pathway for new investments in solar, onshore wind, offshore wind, and energy storage. It also impacts the rooftop solar market in the state. The state of Michigan finally settled up the bill from civil lawsuits over its bad water supply up to 2014, when the city of Flint finally diverted its water source to the Flint River. The state agreed to pay $600 million in settlements. For those of you following crypto, a petition to the Florida Department of Financial Services came through asking the department to declare officially whether the company's business model to sell virtual currency in the state through automated kiosks would be considered within the Florida money transmitter statute. Texas and Alabama regulators teamed up to issue emergency cease and desist orders to stop a company from advertising cryptocurrency debit cards without being registered in either state. So if you see ads for Liquid Gold Trust, Liquid Card Solution, or Liquidity Global Card Solution, you will definitely not avoid financial stress caused by the COVID-19 pandemic and make money while staying home. The California DBO also shut down the International Silver Network that was offering ISN coins without being registered as a commodity merchant either with the CFTC or California. For those of you following cyber tech, fintech, innovation, and the like, the Florida Cybersecurity Task Force is having 2 open meetings, one discussing workforce operations and the other work group operations. And finally, Nevada named a new state chief information officer who will execute the strategic direction of state information technology. In our Find Tracker this week, the North American Securities Administrators Association, or NASA, announced that its COVID-19 Enforcement Task Force, which consists of state and provincial securities regulators, has initiated actions to disrupt 220 schemes seeking to fraudulently profit from the pandemic. The Federal Trade Commission and the state of Wisconsin have sent warning letters to a company that placed newspaper advertisements and social media posts suggesting it could provide government stimulus money to customers to purchase their hearing aids. And finally, the New York Department of Financial Services has filed charges against a third set of entities being accused of perpetuating the opioid crisis. For those of you following the LIBOR transition, CME has expanded clearing of OTC interest rate swap products that will now reference alternative rates to LIBOR. Additionally, the Alternative Reference Rate Committee, or ARRC, while it is definitely supporting adoption to the upcoming ISDA-IBOR fallback protocol, they identified this week a subset of derivatives markets participants that should adhere as promptly as possible. ARRC also issued guides that help with home equity products as well as student loans. These guides have to do with ARM transitions, and I'm not referring to my arm. I'm talking about the difference between adjustable rate loans as opposed to variable rate loans. For those of you following privacy, all the news this week was related to COVID and health data. HHS and the National Committee on Vital and Health Statistics is hosting a public meeting exploring the privacy, confidentiality, and security considerations for data collection and use during a public health emergency in light of the pandemic. Similarly, the Pennsylvania Department of Health announced it's joining the bandwagon of other states in conducting its own pilot program for a new exposure app, COVID Alert PA. For those of you following social justice, Arkansas has proposed hate crime legislation. Meanwhile, Texas is proposing a law that bans state funding for cities that choose to defund the police. The SBA and the Department of Labor announced their record scorecard for federal procurement contracts. The scorecard measures the small disadvantaged, women-owned, service-disabled, veteran-owned, and historically underutilized business-zone businesses that win federal contracts. I was really excited about this progress until I realized they got an A+ for meeting the goal of 5%. New Jersey formally eliminated the title of freeholder from public office because the language comes from historical racial injustice that had to do with landholders in New Jersey. New York formally recognized the childhood home of Susan B. Anthony and marked it for historical preservation to commemorate the centennial of the women's suffragette movement. For those of you watching SROs, the U.S. Senate Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs criticized Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac's decision this week to increase mortgage refinancing costs for homeowners in the midst of an economic downturn. The SEC voted to rescind a rule that normally allowed SROs to have NMS plan filings effective upon filing. Instead, the SEC wants to force the public to have a comment period before it goes live. And the FICC proposed a rule change that will amend their MBSD clearing rule book so that it outlines the key components for stress testing. In other federal news, the Department of Homeland Security is now going to be allowing seasonal agricultural workers to immigrate into the country to avoid food shortages. And in state news, the Wisconsin Department of Financial Institution was leading a governor's task force on student debt, and they released their final report last week. It outlines 37 proposed solutions and 8 recommendations for how Wisconsin can provide relief, education, and protection to its student debt holders. A few weeks ago, the FDIC issued new rules that I commented at the time would allow for a little bit more predatory lending. I thought, that could harm people. Apparently, the New York Department of Financial Services agrees with me and is now suing the FDIC because of these rollbacks. This follows along a similar suit New York Department of Financial Services has filed against the OCC. In coincidental timing, the California Department of Business Oversight published its annual report of payday lending activity for 2019. While the changes only varied about 1% from the previous year, and of course this is pre-pandemic, but it showed that California payday lenders issued 10.2 million in loans worth $2.8 billion to more than 1.6 million customers in 2019. The Secretary of Health in Pennsylvania has now allowed for mail-order Naxalone, which reverses the effects of opioid overdose. And that's it for RegAlytics US Alerts. Join us every Wednesday morning on LinkedIn, and for the longer version, head over to YouTube.